And here we go. Hello, everyone. It's so great to be back with you all on another FISMA Friday. This is the event that truly puts some pep into your food safety step. I hope you all agree. My name is Jim Albright, and today we are diving into a topic that nobody inside the food and beverage space really wants to deal with, but it needs to happen. And we're talking about recall readiness today. And we'll be talking about some common mistakes that tend to morph into full blown crises, and also what your mock recalls should actually test, and why the whole plant, and not just your FSQA team, needs to be ready for. So, those of you who are new to the series, we welcome you. FISMA Friday is a collaboration between the Atchison Group, who's a global leader in food safety and compliance consulting services, and Safety Chain, the award winning platform that removes paper based and other outdated data gathering processes to give you real time visibility into optimizing your plant's performance. Now, I just want to tease this out here for a second, but at the end of today's session, I'll give you a chance to lend your voice to the next food and beverage industry benchmark report and get a chance to win a $500 Visa gift card. So stay tuned on that. All right, I am thrilled to have back with us today Sam Davidson. He's the Director of Food Safety at the Atchison Group with over 30 years' experience doing quality and food safety roles at companies like Coca Cola, Tim Hortons, and Maple Leaf Foods. Sam is a longtime HACCP hero and is a certified BRC internal auditor, SQF practitioner, and AIB food defense coordinator. So, yeah, Sam definitely knows a thing or two about recall readiness. Sam, it's great to have you with us.
Thank you, Jim. Great to be here again. And I think I've decided that in future, no matter where I go, I'm going to have you come with me and introduce me to my clients
You bet. I'll bring
and
my
what
air
else.
horn. Yes.
Because you really are a great cheerleader.
I'm a cheerleader for you, buddy. We got you. All right. Well, take it away, Sam. Well, looks like we have some FISMA updates, I think, right? Yep. Here we
Yeah, we've
go.
got a couple of things going on. As you may have heard, there some of the issues going on with our food safety regulatory bodies in the U.S. That there's definitely some issues going on. Some teams have been shut down, some have been fired, that sort of thing. So the Advisory Council on Immunization Practices, you may be aware, a couple of weeks ago, the entire team were fired. So they are bringing in new people, and this week they are starting their meetings again. So look out for what's coming out from there for those immunization practices. There is an update. FDA have updated the General Food Labeling Requirements Compliance Program and Food Chemical Safety. The FDA has released that for public comment, and its proposed method for ranking chemicals in food safety. The idea around that is basically a risk assessment to see, which are the most or of greatest concern, I guess. And there's lots of other bits and pieces that you can get from FDA. They can show you the recalls, enforcement acts, issues from other manufacturers. I'm sure a lot of you are aware of it, but the website's there to get your updates if you choose to have them emailed to you.
Great.
Yeah, so that's a brief of what's going on. So I'm going to start off with these couple of slides, and I'm going to be referencing them later on in the presentation. But really, I just want to talk about the complexity of a global supply chain. Here you have, because it's FISMA, we'll call it a veggie burger, but really, this is the beef burger, and what's involved with making this burger. Okay, so you've got the buns, you've got the lettuce, you've got, how are the buns made, right? You've got the wheat there, you've got onions, you've got spices, you've got cheese, you've got condiments, you've got all those sort of things. So these, if you imagine, especially if you are producing or manufacturing something that goes straight to consumer, you imagine that you're the seller of that cheeseburger. So when you consider, or if you get into an issue where there may be a recall or there may be issues with your product, their complaints, then you have to reach out to your suppliers. So this is just the start of what we're talking about here is, this complexity. First of all, we've got a number of items on the screen here, but if you look in the next slide, okay, there's the ingredients that go into, for example, there's the bun. Look at the ingredients that are involved in the bun. Same for the cheese. Even when you look at pickles, that sort of thing. The different sauces. So there are a lot of things, a lot of ingredients that could be involved in it. So if you, as I said, if you're the manufacturer of the burger, then you go to your bun manufacturer, and then they may have to look at all the ingredients involved in their bun. Same with the cheese and that sort of thing. So that's the ingredients that go into it. But on the next slide, you will see where these ingredients come from. So it literally is global. So, this is part of the conundrum when you are potential conundrum when you get involved with recall. And the importance of supply chain is understanding where your products are coming from, where your ingredients come from. As the cheeseburger manufacturer, you want to know or be able to see all of this information, know what's going into your product and where it comes from. It's the globalization. It's the world we live in right now, and we'll continue to. So I just wanted to show these, and I tend to use these slides when I'm teaching HACCP as well. So just a quick show of what we're going to be looking at, and I'll explain later on the next couple of slides the importance of these slides I've just shown you. So on the next slide, talking about recalls, preparing for recalls, and even during a recall, what are the things that you have to consider? The first thing is you have to believe that you are the source. So the cheeseburger manufacturer comes to you and says, we've got complaints, someone's sick. You supply some of the ingredients in our cheeseburger. We need to hear from you. We need to know what's going on. So you have to consider that you are the source until it's proven otherwise or proven correctly. Now, it's difficult for the manufacturer because they will push all their suppliers. So they need to investigate. And you should take this seriously. Even though you believe that you're not the source, you should consider that you are the source of the recall. When you get involved with it, you need to involve the entire team. Now, we talk about HACCP teams, we talk about recall teams, we talk about food defense teams, those sort of things. But ensure you involve everybody. And if need to, use outside sources. As a consultant, I do get pulled in from time to time to help with companies that are in a recall scenario. You need to see that everyone's involved and everyone has input. Coming on the next point, considering everyone's opinion. I have been involved with companies who there have been two people decided that there should be a recall, and they instigated it. And they thought they had the source of the recall. Pretty soon after that, with the input of other members of the team, which were not there initially, they realized there were more issues, and the recall expanded because they didn't have everyone's opinion. It could have been a lot more straightforward if they had had the whole team together and discussed the options, tried to identify the source and other investigations. So you need to have everyone there. When you have everyone there, you should have a scribe. So many times I've seen recall programs. And one of the things we do quite a lot with TAG is look at programs for companies. And you'll find a lot of time there's no scribe. The scribe is there to solely record what's going on, nothing else. They are not to do anything else apart from document everything that happens. This helps a lot because I've worked with companies and I've asked for timelines and what's happened, and they can't really tell me, and they can't remember, or there's something missing. You have that scribe there, you can detail everything that's going on, and that helps with the next part, and that's transparency. You want to be able to ensure that you can show to whoever wants to, or whoever needs to, show them what's going on, what steps you've taken from the moment you get that first consumer complaint or customer complaint to the closure of the recall. You want to have everything in there so that everyone is aware of what's going on. That's part of your transparency. Practice, obviously preparing for a recall. We don't ever want to, but practice, perform mock recalls. Um, Go deep into the recall. Go for the full recall. Have the entire team there. Pull everybody. Get your whole team and you work through it. Too many times I've gone into a scenario or gone to a company and people don't know what they should be doing. Sales and marketing are going, well, why am I involved in this? I don't make any of this stuff. Why am I on a recall team? They're the ones that are communicating to customers. So ensure when you're practicing, you have a proper recall with a scenario and you get everybody involved. Communication with employees. So this is one recently I've worked with, and employees fear for their jobs. They're like, oh, we're on a recall. Does that mean we're closing down? Does that mean that we're done? People are nervous, and majority of the time employees want to do the right thing. And it's not always necessarily a manufacturing issue or an employee issue, but they want to hear what's going on. They get nervous. It's a good idea to maintain communications with employees routinely. It doesn't have to be every day. It doesn't have to be, every other day. You can bring it up depending on the size and the intensity of the recall. Obviously, you've got a lot of stuff going on, but there should be some sort of communications with employees so they're aware of what's happening. And when I say involve the entire team and more, you may be using employees to help you with it as well. You may be reaching out to employees, and that communication, linking back up to the transparency, will help with your recall or your preparation for your recall, and maybe some insights. People on the floor are the ones that know everything that's going on. They're one of the first people I talk to when I go to a facility, especially a facility that's maybe had an issue with a regulatory agency. We talk about food safety culture a lot, and just going and talking to some people that are on the floor, they can start telling you all sorts of things, and maybe things that management don't necessarily want to hear, but at the same time, it needs to be heard. Maintain communications with your regulators. Now, that's probably more enforced than anything anyway, because they want to know what's going on. Okay, they're the enforcement agency. They're the ones that manage it. They're the ones that determine really if it's a recall or not. And when you determine that a recall has ended, you have to provide evidence to them to show that it's complete and you've performed corrective actions. One of the things that I didn't add here and I meant to add was maintain communications with your customers. There's a reputational risk involved when you're in a recall. That transparency part, right, is part of, you want your customers to have some sort of faith in you. You're going to lose some amount of reputation, but how do you rebuild that, or how do you ensure that your customers will come back to you? That communication is key. Next slide. Okay, so these are some of the don'ts, and this is all coming from my experience and what I've seen and what I've been involved in, both the previous slide and this slide. Don't blame somebody else. Don't point fingers. I think a lot of people will remember the Maple Leaf Foods recall in 2008. Once the investigation was completed by CFIA, and it was determined that the source of the listeria outbreak came from a Maple Leaf facility, Michael McKean, the CEO, stood in front of the press and said, the buck stops here. The buck stops with me. He owned up to it and didn't blame anybody else. He even called out the CFIA and said they were not at fault. It was Maple Leaf Foods that were at fault. So sort of going back to, take ownership. Expect that it's you until you're proven otherwise. But if it is you, admit it and don't try to blame anybody else. That just looks poor on your part. Talking about customer confidence, that sort of thing. You can say, well, there's no way it can be me. I got a AA+ in my BRC audit. There's no way that I could be involved in a recall because we got a great audit score. There's no way it could be us because it's never happened to us before, right? Don't start making excuses. We all know audits are there to ensure your programs are in place. Um, but you don't have an auditor there 24/7. It's a point in time where they can be there, even when they're unannounced. Right? It's a point in time. They can't cover everything, so don't expect that you can hide behind an audit score. Do not make the decisions on your own when you're in a recall scenario. You need to talk to your team. Just the same as you have a multifaceted HACCP team, because although I would say the majority of us on this call are probably food safety people, food safety experts, we like to think we know it all, right? At least that's what I always thought. That's not the case. We need to have input from everybody. Maintenance, for example, will know about equipment. Sure, QA and food safety people are pretty well knowledgeable about, say, biological hazards, but we don't know everything around potential physical hazards, for example. So you want that input from the team. Have as many people as you need to there to work with it and make decisions. Now, this next one, and Jim and I had a little bit of a joke about it before. Don't lawyer up. Now, generally, in most recall teams, you will have some sort of legal counsel. You may have lawyers on site, or you may have lawyers in corporate. You will have some sort of legal representation, maybe on retainer. I'm not saying don't use a lawyer, but just be careful when. Don't let the lawyers take over. I guess that's maybe my point. We need them. They understand the law. We don't. Again, you don't make the decisions on your own, but don't let them rule it. I've been in scenarios where basically the legal team have said, well, we can't share any information with anybody apart from regulatory. Again, that looks bad for your customers, consumers. If they don't get the information, they don't know what's going on, then they will start to think that things are worse than they actually are. Okay, take it all into consideration. Do not just lean heavily on one person or the other, and don't let one person or another take control of it all. It has to be a team decision. It has to be a team that works together on it. Okay, lawyers are essential. They help cover our butts when there's issues. So my phrase, don't lawyer up, is not exactly right, but it's just the way I thought of it. Some people may have questions. Some people, one of the things I asked Jim at the start of this, are there any lawyers on the call? I don't want to get into a fight with anybody. So the next part is when you're performing your mock recall. A traceability exercise is not a mock recall. Traceability exercise is very important to a mock recall, but it's not all. You need to understand the team members and the people that would be involved in a recall. They need to be involved in it. You won't have sales and marketing, for example, being part of a traceability exercise. That's going to be logistics, probably some QA, production people. Great. You can find the product. If you've got something like SAP, you can determine where the product is in seconds in some cases. That's fine doing that part. But what if your phone numbers are incorrect for customers? What if you don't have the right information for your regulator or your local office? What if there's change in personnel? What if you can't get that communication out? And there's a lot of the customer-focused information comes through sales. So you want to ensure that's going on. Okay. So even when you're looking at traceability, and remember the cheeseburger, right? And look at the traceability and look how far in some cases it can go back. Or if you're the supplier of an ingredient for the cheeseburger company, look how far you've got to go back in some cases. Okay. And the traceability rule, although it's been delayed, is coming out soon, or 16 months now, I guess. And your supplier approval program, it's all part of it. So you need to consider these things. You need to look really in depth, and your traceability exercise, as I said, can be really short, maybe half an hour. But when you're in a recall, this is not going to take you half an hour to go through a recall. You have to have the team members in place. They need to know what they're doing. A lot of times, a recall manual or a recall binder is way too big for anyone to sit and read, especially those that are not involved with food safety. They don't want to waste their time reading through a manual. It's not a waste of time, obviously. But they've got other tasks, right? So they need to know what they should be doing, and a mock recall is a great way of doing that. So ensuring that you have the whole team together. And in some cases, we've looked at, I used to manage a mock recall binder or the recall binder. I've seen a lot of recall binders come through for us to review, and they're huge. And I'm sure most of you do have a huge document or set of documents, and you need to have it all there for FDA. They'll want to review it. Your auditor will probably want to review it. But again, you can't expect everyone to read everything on it. So what we do now is, and what we recommend is cheat sheets just for the individuals. So legal team, here's what the expectations are from you. Maybe social media people, here's what we expect from you. Same with sales, same with SLT, right? So give them the cheat sheet and make them understand that, or to help them understand what they do, but then test them, perform a mock recall. We have one of my colleagues is great at mock recalls and creating scenarios, and I have worked with him and gone on site to a corporate office with only one person knowing that we're arriving, and we go in and say, okay, we're in a recall scenario. Pull everybody in, and everyone's like, oh, what do we do? You hear that way too often. You should be knowing what your task is when it comes to a recall. If you're on that recall team, you should be knowing what your responsibilities are. Do not ignore regulatory advice, or maybe even intentionally go against regulatory advice. I'm reminded of, I think I can say this without getting in trouble because they're not a client of mine, and it was all definitely public, but there was a THC-based mushroom company that had a recall, or sorry, that had incidents, should I say. People started getting sick. There are possibly deaths involved with it. They ignored advice from FDA to perform a recall. And this went on for quite a while. I was actually surprised. At the time, I thought legally they had to, because if FDA demanded, then they have to. I found out that they don't. And it has to go through a series of court battles, or whatever you want to call it. They continue to keep their product on the shelves. FDA were warning everybody, do not consume this, do not sell it, do not, etc. But it was maybe a couple of months before they decided they were going to initiate a recall. Obviously, more people got sick. More people were hospitalized. As I said, there's potentially 3 deaths associated with it. But once the final report comes out, we'll know for sure. But a lot of that could have been stopped. I don't know if that company is still in operation anymore or not. I would definitely lose faith in that company. I would not want to use them again. So an example, I guess, of regulatory advice. And, we always see inspectors and the government as being sort of the enemy, because they come in with enforcements and they ask you to do this and that and whatever. But they're also a great source of help. If you have a good relationship, and we don't always have that, but if you have a good relationship with your local authority, your local inspector, they can be great help. They have got great resources, and they can be part of that team, I guess. You obviously need to notify them when you're in a recall, but they could be someone else that can help. So do not ignore regulatory advice. So these are, as I said, these are things that I have experienced or witnessed, and my thoughts around it, and things that I've seen. I've been involved in a lot of recalls. Some that were more hurtful than others, I guess, or exhausting than others. Some, when they work well, they work great. When they don't, there's a lot of headaches. So you really preparing for a recall, testing your recall system, Having that transparency, I think, are very important. So with that, Jim, have you any questions?
Yeah, sure. Sam, thank you. Thank you so much. And again, just taking a lot of those stories that you told really puts it into context. At least for me, it does. As I was listening to you, it kind of made me think about, the complexity around FSMA, the complexity around other food regulatory requirements. It's always changing. You have to really communicate all of those changes, and you really have to make sure that people are understanding what those changes mean and how it impacts them in their role. So I wanted to ask the question to you: are there any benchmarks or other ways to measure success that companies, in your experience, seem to forget about tracking when doing, say, a mock recall?
That's a really good question. Um, Complaints. So sometimes it takes one or two serious complaints to instigate that recall. But I have witnessed where there has been a buildup or a trend of sort of almost low level quality complaints before it gets to a food safety concern.
Hmm.
Monitoring those complaints properly and seeing a trend and see if that trend can uh, point towards a food safety concern or a class 1 or class 2 recall. Yeah, that needs to be monitored for sure.
And you talked about keeping your regulators updated as a recall is occurring. And I'm wondering if there's specific information that maybe shouldn't be shared as you're going through the recall process. I guess what is considered too much information? What should companies think about in terms of providing the right type of information, but not providing too much information? Does that make sense?
It makes sense. Um, that can be a tricky one, especially when the regulator is involved. They'll want to see and know everything. So if FDA comes in and says, "Show me everything," so
Mm,
it's hard not to. Um, there could be. Oh, I'm trying to think of a scenario where you wouldn't, and maybe someone on the call would come up with this, but it's hard because they're responsible for it. They're the agency that you report to.
yes.
Um, Certainly, when it comes to maybe customers or consumers, you could restrict some of that information,
Right.
but it would have to be pretty important stuff to withhold because really we talked about transparency and communications.
Hmm.
Um, it's important that for your regulator, for your customers, that they are kept well informed.
Yeah.
It doesn't look good on a company if you're not keeping up communications. You already have a damaged reputation because you're on a recall. Withholding information will only ruin or worsen that reputation.
Yeah, I mean that kind of goes back to what you were saying, and you told a story on this where Maple Leaf, they called it out, they owned it, and as you said, a few times, you have to believe that you're the source until it's proven otherwise, or that it's proven to be
Mm-hmm.
sure. Is there, in your experience, is there anything, and again, I know you shared some experience, but is there anything that you can advise companies to help foster more trust after a recall to not just their customers, but to the public at large? And again, I know you mentioned there's a social media plan, get the executive leadership team to talk about it more openly. What else can a company do to just really gain back that trust?
That's a really good question. I would guess there's a number of things. Part of it, a big part of it, is that communication. To start off with, um, consumers first of all will react straight away by not buying product. Right, simple as that. There'll be a
Mhm.
fear of your product, and maybe even other companies that produce that same product will get a hit as well. Um, so it's that reassurance especially once the recall is over. Uh, it's very important for the company to communicate how they identified the issue, what the issue was, how they fixed it, and how they're going to prevent it from happening again,
Right.
and give that assurance to consumers, customers, everybody. And we're talking. Ideally, you wanted to be the CEO talking about these sort of things.
Right. Yes.
Surely there's going to be a lot of technical stuff involved, or there might be. So maybe if you're a large organization, we talk about Maple Leaf Foods, so Michael McCain talked about it, but they also have a chief food safety officer, and a lot of larger organizations now have chief food safety officers, and they could be front and center, or they could be standing side by side with the CEO with all the technical answers or any questions that they have that may be more detail than you expect a CEO to know. Again, transparency, communications, letting people know that you're doing the right thing and want to do the right thing, and you're maintaining you want to exceed standards that maybe you've had before, and you want to bring
and show proof. You've got to prove it.
Yeah. Talk about the programs that you've updated. Maybe it's something to do with sanitation, and now you've brought in a whole new set of equipment, or using new techniques, or doing something that's
checks and balances.
Leading edge of the industry.
This kind of relates to a question Bill just asked here. Is there any guidance document on how to interact with the FDA during a recall? So, for example, what steps to take, what information needs to be provided, in what format? Do you have to set up an account with the FDA, or is it different state by state?
Not state by state, but there are regional for FDA. If you believe that you need to, well, I guess let me rephrase this. You want to communicate to the regulatory agent. You want to communicate to the FDA. You go to their recall coordinator and you say, this is what we're going through right now. And they will determine if it's a recall or not. And they will determine the classification of the recall.
Right.
Whether it's 1 being the most serious, 2, or just a withdrawal. And they will help you through that. And then they will start asking for information. So there's not necessarily a set rule or a set template. There are definitely, you can search online, and you can look at even Google Scholar or something like that, and you can get lots of good templates to help you with the type of communication you want to put out and how to do it.
Alex is asking, do you have any suggestions on how to strengthen the relationship with the local FDA contact? You brought that
up, Billy. Alex, what can I say? Great question. The problem is we're all human, right? And sometimes it's personalities, and sometimes personalities clash. I have worked with, let me put it this way. I'm in Canada, so CFIA. The first job I had in Canada was a meat facility, so there was daily presence by CFIA. The inspector at the time didn't want to have anything to do with me, and then he went into retirement. He was at the end of his career. And this new guy came in and he bugged the life out of me. I would try to avoid him. He would have me paged. He would ask people for my cell phone number if I wasn't around. This guy ended up teaching me so much about Canadian Food Inspection Agency and Canadian food safety systems, where the last time I saw him was maybe about 2 years ago. A little bit more than that. But when he saw me, he came up and grabbed me and gave me a kiss, right? So we had a really good relationship. It took a while to build, but in some cases, there are people that are just very hard to please, and they can rub you up the wrong way. I guess patience and communication is probably something that the best way to improve that. They can be difficult. I have worked with other ones that are just, they've no interest in what you're saying. They don't, it can be very black and white. So they want to see the facts. They don't see that, they can't read between the lines sometimes, or they don't want to. So even though a regulation says you must do A, B, and C, you could be doing A and C and missing B, but you have a reason for it and you can explain it out. And some regulators don't see that bit, and don't want to see that. They want to see everything black and white. They don't get the gray part, and that's difficult. So sometimes trying to get them to listen can be hard, but it's a difficult one. But I would say, yeah, communication and patience is probably the best way to, because we have to deal with them. We have to deal with FDA inspectors. We have to deal with the local FDA office.
Mm-hmm.
And I say have to, like it's a strain. It can be a strain, but at the same time, you want to try and build that relationship, right, and stay in communication with them. Don't think of it from their point of view as well. Why would they be cagey, or why would they be less than comfortable with you? It's sometimes it takes it's a two-way interaction. But yeah, I just try to communicate, transparency, patience.
Now, let's go back to the mock recall section of the presentation. There's a few questions coming in here.
Yep.
Can you, and I'm paraphrasing here one of Kelly's questions, but what should be included in a mock recall that you typically don't see when you're on site or when you're talking with some of your clients?
Yeah, it's not, I guess, what I would, to turn that question around a little bit, what I always see is a traceability exercise, and too often it's just a traceability exercise. Yes. So you don't have that communication with the team, you don't have that scribe, you don't have input from everybody and have those discussions. All too easily people think, oh, it's only a mock recall, so why would I worry? You don't have all the team members there that should be there. Those are the sort of things that I find are not present in a mock recall. Some I've seen are really good. In fact, one company, I was reviewing them and they were fantastic, but they actually got into a recall and they ignored everything they'd done in their mock recalls, and it made it worse for them. So, take them seriously and learn from them. Right? Don't panic when you're in a recall. It's a high stress situation, but remember, if you're performing mock recalls well, that'll help you in a real recall scenario.
Yes. And Dylan asked the question around what types of information is required within a recall binder. And, again, it kind of goes back to all of the various people that need to be involved. And you mentioned some cheat sheets. But again, documentation is very important when that FDA or whomever shows up at the door, and they need to see that you actually had a plan and you're implementing it successfully. Again, in your experience though, Sam, do you know of a few examples where companies have just missed maybe some critical steps, or just missing parent, recall readiness processes?
I've seen some that are, I wouldn't necessarily missing things, but they're weak in how they try to communicate the message.
Okay.
Be clear. I had a French teacher many years ago, excuse me, and he always used this acronym KISS. Keep it simple, stupid. And you just need to have that clear communication part in your program and in your SOPs. You obviously want to have all the contact details of the people that are on your recall team. You want to have the contact details of FDA recall coordinator, your region, your local office. If you have GFSI certification, you normally have to, or you have to communicate that with your certification body. Then, depending on the type of product, who are the authorities in your field? Is there a local university that you can help? Is there a lab that you can use for testing? Are there maybe I'm just trying to think of some example. Allergy. I'm trying to think of the allergy group that can be useful as well, and you can reach out to them and they can help with those if it's an allergy scenario. but experts in the field of what you're doing. You don't have to necessarily be the expert, but when I said, use your team and more, those third-party people can help,
Yes.
and have them ready. Some cases they have, we did talk about social media. In some cases, they'll have companies will have a group on retainer for this particular reason, for their communication, and put out the communication, to say, we're doing everything we can, things are going to be great, and have that social media presence to create awareness and, I guess, a certain level of comfort to show that we're doing what's right, we're on top of it, we're going to get it fixed.
Yes.
So companies use that, third parties, for communication as well. So there's really in some cases, and that's why I say sometimes recall binders are so big, because there's so many parts of information and so many guidelines, or maybe rules, looking through FSMA and looking through the regulations and looking for human food regulations. People will copy and paste that into their binder, and they'll have all these things, right? So you end up with this massive document.
Yes.
So it can be a lot, but then you feel that you don't want to take anything out of it because recall is important.
Yep. And I guess just as a follow-up, what would you suggest is a good cadence to audit your recall plan to make sure that you have all the most up-to-date information?
Generally, the requirements are, GFSI standards will say once a year.
Yeah.
Maybe customers want twice a year. I know companies that do it monthly, and they will do a full mock recall every month, so they're ready to go.
My goodness.
Personally, I would like, if I was food safety lead in a company, I would do them quarterly.
Yes.
I would look at you do one forward and one back. Go to your customer, you go to a supplier. In some cases, I would want to go more in depth. I would really want to put in a scenario where it's a wholesale fire show.
Right.
Right.
All right, I got a great question here from Justine. I'm going to add this one to the stage so everybody can read along. What if the supplier is not the original source of an ingredient? Who would want to identify as the source if your vendor is not the original source? So again, the person or the company that you're buying an ingredient to make your final product, their vendor is the original cause. So how would that be?
So that's a big part of your supplier approval program, your supply chain preventive control, and the traceability rule that's coming out.
Mm-hmm.
In the next year and a half, you will have that traceability rule out, where you should be able to say, if it's lettuce, you should be able to identify where that seed came from. Though the responsibility is the supplier. Not the original source. The responsibility is the supplier that sent it to you.
Right.
Sure, you'd want to know who it is, but then that would be up to your supplier to help you with that.
Right. And that inherently is where a lot of folks are struggling, I think, because they're not necessarily getting all of the information that they need to have in a timely way. Justine also asked a question around ready-to-eat food having more recalls than ingredient suppliers. Overall, again, this is about making sure you have the right data, that you are in compliance from all of your suppliers and your suppliers' suppliers, and that's really what the food traceability rule is going to help get straightened out for everybody. But not easy to do, especially if again, you're collecting data not in a timely way, or data is coming in a different format that maybe your systems don't speak to, and there's many variables that could kind of slow things down. But yep. All right, I see we're running out of time here, so I want to make sure we get through a couple of other questions here. Have there been any changes recently on how to interact with the FDA? Cannot leave a message to call back and must fill in a form to submit to an FDA coordinator first.
Basically, no.
Okay. They make it easy then.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you should be. And Bill, I have been in a scenario where I've talked with a company and I said I think we should initiate a recall. Contact your recall coordinator. And that exact thing has happened where they've gone. There's been a voicemail saying I'm out of the office and I'm on vacation and we'll be back on Tuesday, and this is like a Thursday. Um, in that scenario, I would initiate the recall and then let them know that you're in the middle of a recall.
Right.
And they will, in some cases, the FDA may downgrade the recall. You may consider it as a class 1, and they'll maybe give it a class 2, or vice versa. But there's not really an easy way. The answer is no.
And then,
sorry about that, Bill.
as a follow-up, Alex was asking, has there been any recent changes on how to report a recall? It doesn't sound like it, right?
No, when it's the FDA, it's the same thing. And my fear is with the cuts that have been introduced in the U.S. government. I fear things are going to get harder.
Right.
There's going to be more onus on the manufacturer or the supplier. We haven't seen it yet, or we're starting to see a little bit of it. I fear it's going to get worse, and I'm sure a lot of people have similar thoughts, but we're waiting to get worried that we're going to get very busy.
Yeah, I would probably echo that sentiment there. I just wanted to highlight a question that Dave was asking around the cheat sheets that you brought up. So you were saying create cheat sheets to the folks in many different departments so that they can quickly see how they're responsible in the case of a recall, and then test them. I thought that was a good point too. Make sure that they are following through. But Dave's question was, does TAG or can you advise people where to go to get examples of what should be on a cheat sheet?
I'm not sure if there are any templates out there, but TAG can recommend that for sure.
Yeah.
Okay. In some cases, it really is a one pager. Yeah. And what is your role as sales and marketing manager? Okay, and then list them out. So we're not talking rocket science here. It's just the steps involved with each member. And QA maybe are looking for records. Production's looking at something else. But it's when you're in a recall and everyone's starting to panic, and you've got the recall coordinator there trying to manage the team and what to do. There's a lot of stuff going on. So if you have even an inkling of what you should be doing, you can get started on that without inundating the recall coordinator with everything.
Right. Here's a good one. Kelly was just saying, is there any wording or verbiage that you would recommend using when contacting customers during a recall?
Try not to be alarmist, but give the truth, right? Be transparent. I would not recommend using words like illnesses or death or anything like that. People get freaked out when there's a recall already.
Yeah.
I'm not saying play it down, but give simple, straight facts. But your verbiage, that's where you get the lawyer.
Okay, all right.
Or your communication expert, if you are lucky enough to have that. In some cases, you may not be, but it's plainly worded, straightforward, non-alarmist. Give the facts.
Get the facts. Yeah. All right. I think that's a good segue too. We want to hear from you. There's a lot of moving parts. We were just talking about traceability, for example, but there's a lot of moving parts when you're doing a mock recall, or if you're doing any type of food safety compliance process. And a lot of what we've seen through our food and beverage manufacturing benchmark survey and the report that followed it is that there's still a lot of data silos. For example, we found that 55% of line workers are trusting their gut rather than using data to make decisions. And this survey was conducted over the course of several different months. 600 facilities weighed in on it, and it's full of interesting tidbits about how to unite your data in your organization so that you can make sure that everybody is getting the right visibility to what's really going on, and you can act a lot faster. So I'd like to invite everybody here on this call. We've got a QR code up here, or you can see the URL, safetychain.com/solutions/manufacturing benchmark report. That's where you can go to lend your voice to help us build the next benchmark report on where your facility is at in terms of being ready, in terms of things like a recall or maybe an unexpected audit. How are you feeling about it? What departments do you feel should be contributing more than they are today? Where do you see the next year in terms of collaboration with multiple departments? So it fits nicely with what we were talking about today. And Sam, we definitely appreciate you providing a lot of insights based on your experience, based on what you're hearing from your customers, and obviously providing some direction for where to go and get some more information. This has been super helpful and obviously a topic that we'll be revisiting in future FISMA Fridays, I'm sure.
Yeah.
So
thank you, Jim. And thank you for all the questions. There's quite a lot of questions today, so I appreciate that.
yes. All right. So check out the industry reports. And also, if you have a moment, check out the Atchison Group at atchisongroup.com. There you'll find a bunch more resources that you can go tackle in terms of everything from recall readiness to obviously just, food safety best practices, HACCP plan building, you name it. TAG also hosts their TAG Talks podcast. So if you're on the road or in an airplane, check that out. That's always a good listen. Folks like Sam will be joining that as well. Or you can head on over to safetychain.com, where we have a library of great resources that we have built in collaboration with the experts over at TAG that you can access. These are guides, these are video tutorials. These are examples of how other companies have solved very similar problems that maybe you're dealing with right now. So head on over to safetychain.com for some of those resources. And of course, I'd like to thank everybody for the great questions, for being part of this series. And we do appreciate you all and hope to see you on the next FISMA Friday. Thanks again, Sam.
Thank you, Jim.
All right. Take care, everybody. Have a great weekend.